Now, Electricity Minister Newzroom Afrika is scheduled to visit various Eskom power stations this week. His first stop will be the Kriel power station, followed by Duba. That's a coal-fired power station in Mpumalanga as well. Afrika expected to assess these stations in line with his mandate to curb load shedding. Now, energy expert Mohamed Madhi joining us now to give us his view of what we experienced this weekend, Mr. Madhi, and that is a weekend free somewhat of load shedding. And I say somewhat because some of us only started really experiencing less and less load shedding after Saturday morning. And then, of course, there was that reprieve on Sunday. But we know that it's going to be back to stage 2 at 4 this afternoon, if not Tuesday. How should we read this situation? Should we start saying that the Eskom leadership, as told by the chairperson here to me the other day, that they are working hard to improve that energy availability factor? Are you seeing this as part and parcel of that improvement?
I think it would be quite a claim to make by any leadership that they are already, going some way towards mitigating load shedding in any way. Load shedding is a consequence of a series of events that have built up over many years. And unfortunately, the most important message is that it's not a quick fix. We can do several things to reduce the impact somewhat, but it is absolutely not a quick fix. And the reason for this is very simple. We have very, very old power stations. On average, our power station age is over 31 years, 31.8 years or thereabouts. And that means in the last 10 years of any power station's life, you have a lot more unplanned breakdowns. You have a much higher cost of maintenance, even if you've been maintaining it properly. And the fact that you haven't been maintaining it properly just exacerbates that problem, makes it so much worse. So we have a structural issue in terms of the age and the condition and the state of play of our power stations. That needs to be fixed as quickly as possible, up to a point. But we also need to find alternatives, and those alternatives are available.
So how then, Mohammed, should we read an ordinary South African like me, who is not an engineer? How in the world do I read the fact that there is a national shutdown that is led by the EFF? This is something that has gotten the whole of government worried to a point where we were told that the army is on standby should anything go wrong. Is it pure coincidence that you have a weekend free of load shedding? And I've just been actually told that this load shedding is suspended up until Tuesday. Is this pure coincidence that you have such improvement at these power plants? To your point, that it would be foolhardy for anyone to believe that the energy availability factor is starting to bear fruit, or the focus on these coal power plants are starting to bear fruit.
Look, I think clearly there has been some attempt made to prevent load shedding as much as possible over this past weekend and today in particular. But the analogy is of someone who is injured, and let's say you're playing a tennis match and you have a twisted ankle. You can probably still eke out another game or two, but sooner or later that ankle is going to force you to stop. And these kinds of short-term shows of availability that we're seeing means that down the line it's going to have an even more negative consequence, if that is what is happening. It is entirely conceivable that due to the random nature of breakdowns that we do have, that you will have certain periods of relatively low load shedding, but on average we'll have a very high stage of load shedding because of the nature of the system. So it would be, again, quite amazing if you had this coincidence of low, load being shed across the country at the same time where you have a call and a national shutdown. On the other hand, I'd be so much more encouraged if this was a ground roots movement, a ground roots response. And I'm not saying, in any particular form, but just if there was a national response by the average person in the street as to what is happening, as opposed to something being led by a political party. Of course, every political party has its right to do what they need to and to work with opinion. But what I see lacking is this outrage by the public of what is happening. It's almost just this acceptance. And, just think back. We've had more load shedding in this year than we've had in the last 18 months. And last year was not great in terms of load shedding. But we've just accepted it as a public, and there hasn't been this massive outcry. We need that pressure to be put on the system to ensure that the right things happen.
Yeah. Well, if that kind of pressure, Mohamed, is something that you think is possibly being fermented right now by the strike that is being put on by the EFF right now, and that kind of pressure starts to mount, as in there are lots more of these, what the EFF is doing today, that then suddenly start showing, I suspect going into the winter period, we may possibly actually see them. But would you be dissuaded from thinking that perhaps this is a self-created crisis if these power plants, as predicted or as said at one point by the chairperson of the ANC who doubles up as Minister of Energy, Gwede Mantashe, that within 6 months, if these coal-fired power stations received the necessary attention, load shedding would possibly be a thing of the past. Would you put that past you to say, could this be, or could this have been a manufactured crisis?
This is certainly not a manufactured crisis. Speaking as someone who was a power station engineer a long time ago at the biggest power station at the time, at Mutimba, back in the late 90s, when Eskom was ranked amongst the top in the world, and knowing what is required and what you need to do to maintain a power station, and then having observed what happened over the intervening years, it's clear that this is something, again, just to repeat, that has built up over a period of time, certainly not manufactured. There may have been attempts to make it worse or better, through a variety of actions, but the fundamental underlying trend that we see is one of neglect, is one of, unfortunately, there has been a lot of corruption that has affected this. There has been theft, those kinds of things, but that has always been in Eskom. Fundamentally, these power stations were not maintained, not looked after the way they should have been. And, no matter what was done, the fact is also that these power stations are aging. No one can do anything about the fact that they're aging. What we should have done, and I hate going back and talking about the past because that doesn't solve problems in the future, but just so that we don't repeat history in the future. What we should have done back in, the mid-2000s and coming up to 2010 is started the new build program and away from coal-fired power stations. And we should have been very, very aggressive and active in a variety of other kinds of generation technologies, which we just never got off the ground. Instead, we built these two behemoths, Kusile and Medupi, and, just entrenched the coal mindset in this country more than it should have been.
Yeah.
So we need to get out of that as quickly as possible.
Mohamed Madhi is an energy expert. Thank you very much for your time. That